As most of you know, in the late 1800s, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky claimed to have two extraordinary teachers. They became known as Mahatmas, great souls, adepts, masters, but only master in the sense of teacher, as in headmaster of a school. They wrote quite a few letters, well over 100, in the 1880s to two prominent Englishmen in India and also to others, explaining their point of view, their philosophy, their view of science and morality, ethics, philosophy. We know these men existed because we have their letters. The originals are in the British Library in London. I have handled them personally myself, and many others have. In my new book, to be released May 19th by Tartar Penguin, I make an effort to let them tell their own story, to say who they are, what they are, how they might be different from the average person, and to say something of their philosophy and something of what they believe about science. These men were 100% human. Since the 1880s, a great deal of superstition and utter nonsense has been published about them. Some people think they are gods, they live in bodies of light, they are immortal, they help you with your personal problems. They flat out deny all of that. They may live, they say, hundreds of years, but not one of them thousands of years. Their body dies like ours, but they know how to take care of themselves so they can keep it alive a lot longer. No less than 30 people, very reputable people, met these two men, or at least one of them, or the other, in the physical body and communicated with them. And in my book, Masters of Wisdom, I quote the testimony from many of those people. It's rather an impressive testimony. Now, ever since that time, people have wondered, are these men still around? Do they still communicate with anyone? Do they still write letters to anyone? We do not know. But we do know that the last letter that all people in the Theosophical movement seem to agree upon, one letter was sent in 1900 to Annie Besant, who was then the president of the Theosophical Society. So we have that letter, but after that we are not sure. I think for sure they do communicate with people, but they say they only have individual contacts with people who can help in the great work for humanity. They say humanity in the mass has paramount control on us. So, do they communicate? Are they still alive? As I said, we have no hard evidence for that. However, I was friends for about 40 years with a woman by the name of Dora van Gelder Kunz. Dora was born clairvoyant, and in Java, Dutch East Indies, she was born into a Theosophical family. She says she died at about 95, I think it was 1999, and she was 95. She said the masters, are called masters very often, were very real to her all of her life. And I'm going to read selections from a talk she gave about the masters toward the end of this talk. But Dora, when she was born clairvoyant, her mother was clairvoyant. And she lived in a rather isolated area, associated mainly with boys and men. She didn't really have any girlfriends when she was little. She wound up liking men more than women, I think, although she would never dislike women. And she thought everyone saw what she saw. If she saw someone recently dead, so did her mother. And then she was with C.W. Leadbeater, who was also a clairvoyant. He saw them too. Well, what would you do if you were a little child and everybody saw what you saw? Wouldn't you think everyone did? She did too, until she was an older child, and then she realized how unusual her gift was. Now, she was a very shy girl. I was friends with her, as I said, for 40 years. And she was very shy as a child. But when she was 11 years old, C.W. Leadbeater came to the family and said, I would like to start a group of young people who are sensitive and train them to use their abilities. I would like to take them to Sydney, Australia. Dora did not speak English. She was shy. She had rather unusual parents. She always said my parents didn't care what I ate or whether I ate. Not like most parents, you must eat your vegetables. Don't want them? Don't eat them. But they did care that I meditate. At 5 years old, they took her to the meditation room and began to teach her to meditate. And we asked her, what did she do? How did you learn to meditate when you were only 5? She said, well, my mother would take me to the meditation room and she'd say, let's sit here and think how much we love one another. Mm-hmm. And that was the beginning of meditation for Dora. So the parents said to her, Mr. Leadbeater wants to take you to Sydney, Australia with a group of young people. You go up to the meditation room and you think about it and make a decision whether you want to go or not. And you come and tell us, and we will abide by your decision. Not many parents would have done that. Shy Dora came down from the meditation room and said, I will go. It must have been a terrifying experience for her. Strangers, a new country, a new language. But she did it because she thought it was the right thing to do. Now, in her early 20s, she met an American by the name of Fritz Kuntz. Her name was Van Gelder, Dora Van Gelder. And they fell in love, and they got married, and she came to the United States. And she felt that if she were to live in the United States and become an American citizen, she should know everything about American history. And boy, she did. She knew more about American history than 99.9% of Americans. She could tell you about any president, whole history. So she did that. Now, there was one other thing about Dora. I want to do this as a preface to the other material. Her husband once said to me, if there is one word that would describe my wife, it is duty. And that was true. Duty not in the sense of something imposed on her, but something she believed to be right for her to do. She would carry through no matter what obstacle stood in her way. The idea of duty is very important to these extraordinary teachers called masters. I quote from one of the letters that Kutumi, that's a pen name by the way, Kutumi and Moria are the two we hear about mostly. Both of those names are pen names. They never give out their real names, they say. But anyway, he wrote this to Mr. Sinnett in India. But my first duty is to my master, that is his teacher. And duty, let me tell you, is for us stronger than any friendship or even love. As without this abiding principle, which is the indestructible cement that has held together for so many millenniums the scattered custodians of nature's grand secrets, our brotherhood, nay, our doctrine itself, would have crumbled long ago into unrecognizable atoms. What is right? In one of the Upanishads, the sweet is one thing, the right is another. And Dora stood for that thoroughly. Now, to come to the idea of students of the adepts. Students, the word they used was chela, C-H-E-L-A in English. Had a very special meaning to them, by the way, which we'll come to. They said there were certain qualifications that were necessary, and the very first one to be a student of an adept, or a master, was to be endowed with clairvoyant ability. Dora had that par excellence. She founded therapeutic touch. She could see the energy. She did not see the physical liver or kidney. She saw the energy pattern around it. And she said that it did not involve the physical eye. It was connected with something to do with the pituitary gland. And whenever she looked at anybody clairvoyantly, she would turn aside, and then she would look back up. I don't know why. Maybe her eyes looked a little strange when she did that, because she wasn't looking at you physically. So that was one characteristic that was said to be necessary to be a direct student of one of the adepts. Dora always said when she gave a lecture, I am not speaking from books. I am speaking from my own experience. She knew the literature. She knew the Mahatma letters. She knew the secret doctrine. She knew the primary literature of the Theosophical movement very well. But when she gave a talk, she talked about her own experience and never anything else. And I knew her so well to say that was a fact. Dora's strength was not in her words. She had a vast vocabulary, but she couldn't put words together quite right. In fact, very often it made us all laugh, because she'd get the wrong word and say the exact opposite of what she really meant sometimes, and hardly ever finish a sentence. She would mix metaphors. One of my favorite is the two metaphors. One is that's the acid test, and the other one, the test is in the eating of the pudding. And she would say, well, that's the acid pudding. So she would get things mixed up, and we'd have lots of laughs together. But when she talked, you sort of understood what she was talking about, in spite of the words. You got it, because she impressed it on your mind. And it was indeed wonderful to hear. Now, she also had a very difficult personality. One of the things the adepts said they had to do with their chelas, that is, those who were directly linked to them, not someone who was just reading something they wrote. And they said very few people would have that privilege, because they had to be sure that that person would be totally, totally unselfish, so that they would never misuse any powers for personal gain, but only for the helping of humanity. So they said they had to in some way impair, I do not know how, I'm only repeating what I've read in this case, and not my experience, had to in some way impair the person psychologically to prevent them from spilling secrets when they shouldn't be spilled. And Blavatsky had a very difficult personality, and she was not a chela, but she was their direct agent, according to their writings. And she had a very difficult personality, and so did Dora. So there was the clairvoyance, there was the difficult personality from the possibility that she was also one of the chelas. Once, when someone was complaining about Blavatsky's tumultuous personality, the adept wrote back, "She cannot help it. She is a psychological cripple." And Dora was like that. Blavatsky had a tremendous presence. She could mesmerize a group talking about the Theosophical philosophy. And when Dora talked about the masters, you felt you were in their presence. And when she was dealing from the personality level, sometimes you wanted to smack her. She was difficult. I got along with her. Some people didn't. So there are little bits of evidence that she was a chela. The clairvoyance, the difficult personality. Then she was once, let me go back a bit. Rukmini Devi Arundel, who was the wife of the third international president of the society, was said to have been a chela of one of the masters. I don't know whether it's true or whether it's not. But the fact is, when Dora, who was then national president out at Wheaton, Illinois, when she was told Rukmini Devi had died, she gasped and said, "Huh, I'm the last one." The last one what? The last one of that group, probably, still alive. And then one night, she lived in the main building out there. It's called the Rogers Building. And there's an apartment for presidents if they wish to use it. And she did, and her husband had already died, so she was alone there. One of the staff was walking by her room in the wee hours of the morning one night, and they heard her alone in the room saying, "I am trying, I am trying." The word try was used over and over again by the adepts in their letters. K.H. once wrote, "We have one word for all aspirants, try." So, why was she saying that? Possibly, at the psychic level, not physical level, one of the adepts was trying to teach her something, trying to get her to understand something, trying to get her to do something. And he probably was saying, "Try, try." And she kept saying, "I am trying." Now, people wonder, as I said, does anyone have any contact with these extraordinary men today? I don't convince very easily. I frequently say I'm a doubting Thomas, and I must put my finger in all 5 wounds before I believe one will not do. I have 5 wounds here. For me, it's a fact. And I count it a great privilege in my life to have been her friend for so long. Now, people want to know, can they help in any way with the Master's work, which is for humanity, remember, not any selfish purpose. Well, what can I do for humanity, they say. It really doesn't matter whether these men are still incarnate in the same physical body. They may have had that body may have died. Those bodies may have died. They may have taken on a new incarnation, or not. But the adept, or the master, or the brother, as they were frequently called, is not the physical body. It's not the personality. It's the inner self, and the inner self is neither male nor female, which apparently St. Paul knew, because he said, "There is neither male nor female, Jew nor Greek, bond nor free, for we are all one in Christ." And Christ, if taken theosophically, is that state of consciousness which in the literature is called buddhi, that state from which we get insight, understanding. That flash of understanding comes from that state of consciousness within us. of St. Paul, K.H. actually said he is the Christian adept. Rather striking statement. So, I believe, and to me it's a fact and a reality, we can come in rapport with these great individuals. Not in a personal way, but if you try to get some sense of their compassion for humanity, I think you enter into the stream of their influence. That's real to me, and to thousands of others. K.H. wrote to Sinnett about this kind of thing and said, quote, "Your strivings, perplexity, and forebodings are equally noticed, good and faithful friend. In the imperishable record of the Masters, you have written them all. There are registered your every deed and thought. For though not a chela, as you say to my brother Moria, nor even a protege, as you understand the term, still you have stepped within the circle of our work. You have crossed the mystic line which separates your world from ours. In thought and deed, by day, in soul struggles by night, you have been writing the story of your desires and spiritual development. This every one does who approaches us with any earnestness of desire to become our co-worker. He himself precipitates the written entries by the identical process used by us when we write inside your closed letters and uncut pages of books and pamphlets in transit. During the past few months, especially when your weary brain was plunged into the torpor of sleep, your eager soul has often been searching after me, and the current of your thought has been beating against my protective barriers. If you hear seldom from me, never feel disappointed, my brother, but say it is my fault. Nature has linked all parts of her empire together by subtle threads of magnetic sympathy, and there is a mutual correlation even between a star and a man. Thought runs swifter than the electric fluid, and your thought will find me, if projected by a pure impulse, as mine will find you, has found, and often impressed your mind. We may move in cycles of activity divided, not entirely separated from each other. Like the light in the somber valley seen by the mountaineer from his peaks, every bright thought in your mind, my brother, will sparkle and attract the attention of your distant friend and correspondent. And it is our law to approach every such an one, if even there be the feeblest glimmer of the true Tathagata light within him, Tathagata the Buddha. Then how far easier for you to attract us. Understand this, and the admission into the society of persons often distasteful to you will no longer amaze you. They that be whole need not the physician, but they that be sick, is an axiom, whoever might have spoken it. So living an altruistic life is the first thing that brings us into rapport with the adepts. He said, it is he alone who has the love of humanity at heart, who is capable of grasping thoroughly the idea of a regenerating practical brotherhood, who is capable of thoroughly grasping the idea of a regenerating practical brother, who is entitled to the possession of our secrets. He alone, such a man, will never misuse his powers, as there will be no fear that he should turn them to selfish ends. A man who places not the good of humanity above his own good is not worthy of becoming our chela. He is not worthy of becoming higher in knowledge than his neighbor. If he craves for phenomena, let him be satisfied with the pranks of spiritualism. Now, often aspirants think the masters are free to select anyone they want as a potential chela. In one sense, maybe there's a little truth in that, but the selection does not really depend upon the teacher's, master's personal will. Explaining that to C.W. Leadbeater, K.H. wrote, "To accept any man," and of course we must remember it's pre-non-gender specific language, this means human, "to accept any man as a chela does not depend on my personal will. It can only be the result of one's personal merit and exertions in that direction. Force any one of the masters you may happen to choose. Do good works in his name and for the love of mankind. Be pure and resolute in the path of righteousness as laid out in our rules. Be honest and unselfish. Forget yourself but to remember the good of other people, and you will have forced that master to accept you." Now there's another way we can come into contact with the adepts, and that is through meditation. This is very, very real to me. We can try to get into rapport with their thought, with their compassion. It is not all that difficult. If the thought is pure, if the intention is pure, if the will is strong. And when you come into rapport, it is very stilling. You can't think a petty thought. You are overwhelmed by their grandeur, by their strength, by their purity, by their freedom from every attachment. And you can help. You can add your bit to their work without ever thinking of yourself or thinking for one moment that they are personally aware of you. The idea of personal awareness is one of the things I tried to show was unwanted by the adepts in the book I wrote. They say it interferes with their work. Back in the early days, when people had just heard of Mahatmas, masters, they were all very curious. This is perfectly understandable. We would have been as well. So they were talking about them all the time, repeating their names, even though it was pen names, asking Blavatsky to please ask Master to help me with my job, or my love life, or something. And she flat out refused. "I will never take such requests to the Master." Because they wouldn't do it. And in the 1900 letter, they said these thoughts were interfering with their work. And this is what they wrote: "The cant about masters must be silently but firmly put down. Let the devotion and service be to that supreme spirit, alone of which each one is a part." In another letter, he once said, "Be loyal to the idea, not my poor self." That devotion and service puts us into rapport with the work of the masters. We enter into the sphere of their influence. Thinking of the masters in that way is not wrong. After that 1900 letter, all that talk about masters ceased. They were hardly mentioned. And I think that was a mistake. What was wanted was not to have all that personal stuff going on, but to think of them in the way I just described, to come in rapport with their work, to feel something of their compassion for the whole human race. That's fine. I'm sure they appreciate that. It's the personal stuff that they don't want. So if we aspire to become colleagues of the masters in their work, to alleviate the suffering of humanity, we can. With an iron, never failing will, yet being meek and gentle, we can come into the sphere of their influence. Now I'd like to read something from a talk given by Dora Kuntz. She gave it in 1955, May 8, White Lotus Day, the day that celebrates and remembers the death of H.P. Blavatsky on May 8, 1891. And she gave it on the Masters and the Path. And she says she would like to present something about the ideas of the Masters, because they've been real to her all of her life, she says. And she points out that they're interested in humanity as a whole. And she says they're not necessarily interested in us because we're members of the Theosophical Society. And they're not interested in the past. Their whole dedication is to the future, to molding the future, to influencing. They never order. They never manipulate. They say, I'm repeating what they say, they influence people. They try to impress on their minds the right way to go. They will never interfere with a will weaker than theirs. Sinnett once was concerned about this, and he said, my conscience would prevent me from doing what I shouldn't do. And K.H. said, the greatest of errors. Your conscience will tell you what you should not do. It'll never tell you what you should do. And he said, you have invited me many times to come into your home. I have not done that. At least physically he didn't. But I could come into your home and within less than 24 hours have complete control over you and you not know the difference. But I would not do that because it is against our rules to subject a weaker will to our own. So they're interested in the future, in shaping it only in the sense of influencing, not in controlling human beings. They don't get involved in personal relationships in the sense of marriage or bonds, of personal bonds that would require them to reciprocate actions, you see, because it would create personal karma. They say they're free of that. Not free of karma, because karma is the fundamental law of the universe, as I said in earlier talks here. The fact that the earth spins on its axis and goes around the sun is karma, because karma only means action. But as Will Rogers once said, it's amazing how much you can write with a few facts. People have all kinds of strange ideas that have absolutely nothing to do with the doctrine of karma as seen by these teachers. She says in her talk, you will find if you read their letters that they, the adepts or the masters, prefer to think of us as colleagues in a great work. So many people think, oh, the masters are way up there. Why would they want us to be colleagues if they didn't think we could do something? See? We're not little worms down here looking up to gods. We're looking at fellow human beings who have an extraordinary knowledge and an extraordinary ability, awe-inspiring, but human, and all under natural law, one letter I remember he said, "Some say the age of miracles is past. We say it never existed." They do extraordinary things, but all by natural law. Now, Dora says, when you know the masters, you cannot help but be devoted to them, but they do not want us to worship them, and the Theosophical Society was not meant to be a religious organization. I think sometimes we put the masters up on a pedestal and feel like little worms below. Some think if they feel tremendous sense of devotion to the masters, they can sit in a chair and do nothing, like being in a monastery. That is not enough. The Theosophical Society was not founded on that principle, and it will not fulfill its destiny if we can unconsciously treat it like a church. The churches have a tremendous work to fulfill, uplifting the people, giving them that faith, and bringing out their devotion. Devotion is a fine thing, but the masters require a very great deal more. We have to feel with the master that sense of being colleagues engaged in a great work together. The more you know about the masters, you cannot help but have that feeling of love and reverence. But that is not why the Theosophical Society is in existence. It is very difficult for us to make the masters real because, first of all, very few of us study the literature. How many people have read the Mahatma letters or the letters from the Masters of the Wisdom? They are basic theosophy. We talk about wanting to serve the masters, but we do not bother to find out what the masters are saying. Few people seem to have read the books. We should go to these original sources. I often advise people to read the Mahatma letters. Now, the masters are not Western. The master's words are tough for us to think about. Our preconceived ideas often make a barrier between us, the path, and the masters. You start with a certain idea of the masters, and in meditation you make an image of your preconceived idea of this picture, which is built out of your background, Christian, Buddhist, Jewish, whatever. And she says the masters are holy, but their real holiness may be completely different from what our preconceived idea of holiness is. The real thing is often a shock to us. Be aware of your preconceived ideas. When you meditate upon the masters, always keep your mind open and see what your impression is, instead of making a mental picture of them. Perhaps you will get more of the reality. Nothing worthwhile is easy. Study what the masters have said, and do not be afraid if you do not understand, because it's difficult. Also, you will get a lot of shocks. I've heard people say, "Oh, a master would never say that." Being more brilliant than the master, of course. If they think something is wrong, they say it. They called Mr. Hume, he was one of the correspondents, and he was rather arrogant. He thought, as an Englishman, he was vastly superior to a dark-skinned Indian. And yet, the adepts worked with him because Hume was doing something they wanted done, helping to free India from colonial rule. They called Mr. Hume some strong names. They saw him as he really was. Mr. Hume wanted to be good, but he sometimes closed his eyes to his faults. What did the masters do? They saw through him, but they worked with him and wrote to him month after month. They never gave up. Did you notice that? Wouldn't we be different? If we see right through someone, we usually say we're through with them. The masters went straight on with infinite patience, and Mr. Hume finally did something worthwhile. Although he quit the society, he became one of the leaders in the National Congress of India. That was part of the work the masters wanted continued. They wanted India free. Now about the path. The path is a true thing, and it is open to everybody, but I think it is not virtue which we lack, it is humbleness. One of the dangers is that lots of people become too concerned with whether they have a true experience, whether they are an initiate, a chela, or what. None of that matters. That's something never occurred to me. Never. Never thought of it. Not even once. The thing which is true is our relationship and our knowledge, and so many people want those things because they want to become something better. This is pride in a way. I want to be better. In the Screw Tape Letters, I really love the little section on humility. You know, the Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis are well worth reading, and it's letters from a senior devil in hell to a junior tempter on earth, and he calls him by the name of Screw Tape, my dear Screw Tape. Have you noticed that your patient, the one he's trying to get away from God, have you noticed your patient has become humble? Have you reminded him of the fact? I think that is so delicious. He will then try to squelch his pride and be proud of his attempt. He said, don't go on too far with this because it will awaken his sense of humor. So just enough to let the person not be aware they're living in pride. And then he says, don't ever let your patient know that the real humility is being able to build the greatest and most magnificent cathedral on earth and feeling about it exactly the same as if his neighbor built it. That is a beautiful example of humility. It is very dangerous, this subtle pride, because we're practically never aware of it. If you continually think of it in this personal way, you lose the essence and eventually you lose the master. The great thing which comes if you meditate on the master is an ability to be unafraid to do, to act, to work, and to experience. Think how you can help. If you get hide-bound, if you get set or enclosed in rigid ideas, if you get into a permanent state of status quo, then you will slowly close the gateway between yourself and the masters. The masters are working eternally for the future, and they work toward a spiritual change. The important thing for you is not to allow yourself to become closed. Always live up to what you understand in an experience sense to be the highest for yourself if you want to meet the master. Be honest with yourself. Meditation can be of great value, but you cannot say, I raise my mind to the Buddhi or the Atma and be there. That's pure nonsense. Just saying the words isn't going to get you there. It is the experiencing, the living of it that matters, and when it is real for you, then you really have something. That is the path. And she goes on and emphasizes not having the preconceived ideas, and that the Theosophical Society is the testing ground for brotherhood. She says, somewhere along in here, that when something comes up, ask yourself how you will take it. Ask yourself what it is about you that needs to be changed. She said, even if people call you a name, call you nasty names in the Theosophical Society, if you leave because of that, you are failing the test of brotherhood. That's hard, isn't it? To take. I've said to Marianne earlier, I've pulled knives out of my back several times from things that happened in the Theosophical Society, but iron horses will not get me out of the Theosophical Society. I will not, if I can help it, fail the test of brotherhood. I will, if I can, see the divine light in the individual that I can't stomach. and I have done so. It's not easy. Nothing worthwhile is easy. If brotherhood was easy, we wouldn't have any wars. We wouldn't have any fights. We'd all live in a mushy kind of existence, which would make me sick to my stomach. Not easy to see the divine light in someone that annoys us, is it? Don't be foolish and say, oh, they're all sweet and good. Well, they're not, any more than we are. So discernment is very important. But discernment of the whole person, not the little photograph that we have of one case, of one action. I have been judged personally, and I'm sure all of you, for both good and ill. Some people think I walk on water. I explain where the rocks are so that they know I don't. And I have been thought a monster because of something I've done. One thing, judged totally. Very difficult not to do that, but nothing worthwhile is easy. So now Dora, here's the other little piece of evidence that Dora is one of the Chelas, or at least one who knew K.H. and Moria. Remember, she never talked about anything outside of her own experience. Never in the 40 years I knew her did she ever give a talk from the books. Always from her experience. And she says this, how can I try to convey something of the experiencing of the masters? I shall try to give a brief description of what I think are some of the characteristics of the two masters, because there are more, of course. Two masters that we always talk about, the Master K.H. and the Master Moria. As I have said previously, there has never been a time in my life when the masters have not been real to me, and I shall try to describe them from my point of view. The Master Moria was the master of HPB, of Blavatsky. If you read the Mahatma letters, you get some sense of his personality. As you know, he is an Indian. He is very tall. I believe he was something like 6'7", but the tribe or the segment of Indians from which he comes was notably tall, very tall. He's very tall and he comes from a very princely family. I think if you are in his presence, you have that sense that you are in the presence of someone who is every inch a king. That feeling really is true because he gives a sense of absolute integrity. That may sound a strange word to use. What is meant by absolute integrity? All of us have masks. All of us think in terms of little things that are not true. If you're in the Master's presence for the moment, all that gets wiped out. All the little things which are not really true, which are not part of what we see as ourselves, are wiped out. If you are in his presence, you meet a person who is so absolutely in the center of his being, who is so absolutely true, that you yourself get the sense of being thrown back into the absolute center of yourself. You get a sense even of the greatness and integrity of yourself. In his presence you could not think of something childish or mean. Of course, there is also a tremendous sense of strength, and of a strength which enables you to carry through to the end, something you have started. In the Master's letters, you will notice he is very economical with words. There is also a complete economy in emotion, in movement, in everything, even his looks. No one in the literature ever described the looks, ever. He has a tremendously noble face, but whatever he feels is not reflected in it. It is a steady face. The facial muscles change very little, because it is the face of a person who is completely at one with himself, and who is cast in a solid granite mold of unity, integrity, and strength. I think that is a brief personification of the Master Moria. The Master KH is totally different in many aspects. Their two personalities could not be more different. Yet they have a sense of tremendous devotion to one another, as you will notice in the letters. They have been colleagues for so many lives. It is really a beautiful thing to notice how they work together. She saw that. A beautiful thing to notice how they work together. The Master KH is tall, but not as tall as the Master Moria. He has a very noble face. Whatever he feels shows. Pictures could never do him justice because his expression varies from moment to moment. He writes beautiful English in the Mahatma letters. He has a great feeling for music and the arts. I think what the Master KH conveys is the feeling of love. You might think if you were in the Master's presence you would feel very small and shy. Perhaps the Master Moria would give you that feeling a little, but not the Master KH. You would have a sense of expanding consciousness, just as you would with the Master Moria. But the Master KH has a great gift of making a person feel as though you had known him all your life. Don't you think that's a great gift of love? He is a person who is so much a personification of love that it draws from me all the love I am capable of. And so it draws from any person who comes into contact with him a sense of outgoing love. That sense of outgoing love is finally a sense of being yourself, a perfect being. We can think about the Masters and we can meditate about them. In fact, we should think about them. If you are in a quandary, and here's a rather unique bit of advice, if you're in a quandary, don't necessarily ask them for help, but if you have dedicated your life to the Masters and the Society and the work, remember that first, then when you are in a quandary, think of yourself in the aura of the Master. After all, the Masters have immense auras. If you can develop this feeling of being within the Master's aura, then you could get a sense of what the Master's reaction would be. We would get into touch, but we would not have to ask for help. This is something all of us can try. Think of the Master when you feel very upset about people. As one of our members said, no people, no problems. If you could put your mind into that state of in rapport, of that perfect love and harmony, you would get some of the love and harmony within you. She goes on with more. I have an edited version of this as an appendix in the new book. I felt it was too long to put as part of the book itself, but it's an appendix, and that's the first appendix, and the second appendix is on meditation, suggestions on how people might learn to meditate. So I hope I've given you some sense of these extraordinary human individuals. They're not omniscient. They're not omnipotent. They don't know what you and I are doing right now. Only if they put their conscious attention on us would they know what we were doing. Some people think they're aware of everything they're doing. Well, they're not. And they're not like the Christian saints that you can ask for help. They don't do that. They say, I believe them. But if you're unselfish, not foolish, but not neglecting your own needs, not being an idiot. Dora used to say that word frequently, don't be an idiot. But really aware of how your actions affect others. We all know how their actions affect us. That's easy. We're not often aware of how we affect others. So if we are truly unselfish, if we're really dedicated to trying to understand these great human beings, to learn something from them, to allow their influence to pour through us, then I think we can. I frequently in my meditations try to do that. I try to be very, very open and feel in the presence of the Master with the intent that I might learn something. Change myself is the main thing. That influence will change me. I've lived at least 3 lives since I came to New York. I don't recognize the former 2 anymore. And I suppose, before I slough off this mortal coil, I may live another life. It's okay to let the past go. It is liberating to stop living in the whirlpool of memory as though it's now. It's gone. The future is also now. It's the potential for everything that can be. And that potential can be changed moment by moment. So let's end with just a moment of silence and be open to the influence of our brothers. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. That was great.
Thank you.
That was great.
I think you'll turn that off.